That is, the important thing isn't that you like it. The important thing is that you make something of it. Nobody can ask for anything better than that, I think, in philosophy.
Certainly reading, the original scheme content stuff back with your Locke lectures, and then reading the metaphor stuff, and then reading the Freud stuff, has made, permanent changes in the way I've thought about things. So, I have sometimes had the feeling that I just sort of go around, waiting for Donald to drop another idea, Then I'll act as PR man, but, or one of the PR men. But I do keep getting, I read my thing on metaphor, which I thought was just, extrapolating from what you said to the Aristotelian Society. Not only did they think it was worthless, they thought that since it was worthless, it couldn't be Davidson's view.
As I remember, you were comparing my view with some philosopher.
Mary Hesse.
Right.
The argument there was Hesse made a great point about saying metaphors are cognitive.
Oh yes, right.
I was saying no, that's not the point. They're just not in the dictionary.
Right. Yes, no, I certainly thought you had that right. Well, people love to disagree with my view about that, of course, because people want to have a theory about what the cognitive content is. It's much more fun than just saying that isn't the right way to think about it.
You undermined the whole metaphor business, really, I think, with that paper, but it churns along anyway.
Oh, it certainly does. Yes.
And everybody has to include one paragraph saying why we don't have to consider Davidson.
Right. Yeah.
I think I had something slightly different in mind, and maybe you were the wrong person, Richard, to bring up. That's the issue that I think is misattributed to the sort of view that's held by a lot of persons who think they espouse correctly to the Rortyan view of the world. That was more of what I had in mind, and I thought that Donald's piece on metaphor precisely grounds the thing into showing what's wrong with metaphor, and then the wrong sort of interpretation is attributed to you that there's some sort of, that there shouldn't be some kind of a distinction between the kind of sentences that you would have in literature and the kind of sentences that you would have.
I don't want there to be a distinction between sentences. I want there to be a distinction between the kinds of communities that toss the sentences around.
Right.
Because I don't want to divide the language up into the metaphorical and literal part.
Right.
What
Science is full of metaphors.
Yeah. What I got from Donald is that metaphors don't last very long. If they're any good, they get literalized. So metaphoricity is a transitory feature of original thought. But Mary put her point in a way that was needlessly paradoxical, and somehow every time you say anything like science uses metaphors too, people accuse you of saying there isn't any real world.
Right, exactly.
Yes,
that's the point. Yeah.
Because they're so convinced that language splits down the middle between the referring bits and the other bits, and science must refer always all the time.
Dick, may I ask you a question? You've often called me a pragmatist, perhaps at the same time urging me to be more of one. And I declined at first on the grounds that I couldn't buy the standard pragmatic formulations of truth, and I have the feeling now that you don't accept them either, and so I'm wondering on what grounds now, if any, would you still say I am a pragmatist?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Let me start by saying one of the best things you did for me was convincing me that in order to follow up on James and Dewey, I didn't have to have anything called a pragmatist theory of truth. Now, I somehow, before your stuff about the indefinability of true began to get clear in my head, I thought, well, if truth isn't correspondence, you got to say what it is. Reading you, I realized, no, you don't. You don't have to have a theory about it. So I now think of the word pragmatism as having two senses. There's a fairly narrow sense in which it just means not accepting a correspondence theory of truth. And you can do that in sort of, simple, unromantic, quasi-technical ways. Nobody's ever made sense of the notion. What do you do with negative hypotheticals? You have to create these things called facts, and where they come from, stuff like that. And you're very helpful for that kind of thing. There's a big romantic sense of pragmatism, which I attribute to James and Dewey, particularly to Dewey, which says, now that we're free of the correspondence theory of truth, we have a change in humanity's self-image. It used to be we were responsible to old Nobodaddy. Then we became responsible to the nature of reality. Now it turns out that we're not responsible to the nature of reality. We interact with the rest of the universe. It conditions our behavior. We condition a bit of its behavior. But there's not a relation of responsibility of human beings to anything non-human. All human responsibility is responsibility of human beings to one another in individuals and groups. That's, as it were, the romantic part of Dewey that I'm fondest of. And which, as it were, starts from saying, let's get rid of the correspondence theory of truth, and then runs with it in direction of, what do you call it, philosophical anthropology or something like that. And I have no idea, whether you like this idea of, transforming the image of the human situation in this in this way of abandoning the idea of responsibility to the non-human. I think of it as the distinctive thing about 20th century philosophy. I mean, I think that's what binds the important analytic figures and the important non-analytic figures together. I believe it or not, I have a book coming out in 10 chapters called Pragmatism as Anti-Authoritarianism, but in Catalan, not in English.
Oh yes,
Girona.
Right.
It'll be published in some other form in English. But anyway, to get back to the question, I mean, you're obviously a pragmatist in the narrow sense in which pragmatists don't believe in the correspondence theory of truth. And I keep, as it were, trying to drag you into this, larger romantic sense of, by getting rid of the correspondence theory of truth, the character of human life has changed.
Well, I'd like to think so. And I mean, in general, I agree with you about responsibility, except I wouldn't mind saying, I don't know whether the word responsible is just the right word, but it seems to me we ought also to accept some kind of obligation toward animals, and even perhaps toward the environment.
Yeah, I can buy that, because I think of it as sort of enlarging the sense of us from, so to speak, the straight white males to, other featherless bipeds and on out from there. But what it avoids is the notion, the sort of standard religious Kantian notion of obligation. Not only would this be a good idea, but you should, because a great non-human power called pure practical reason or the will of God or something like that tells you to.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me as though by your standards I am a straightforward pragmatist.
Even in the romantic sense.
Even in the romantic sense.
That's nice.